I don't know how far it'll go. No, it doesn't go that far. Can you reach it? There you go. Let's bring a shawl because it's so cold in here normally.
It's burning out, but then
Burning
again,
up
I just
too. I was
walked.
sitting in his office and it was like 100 degrees in there. Hope you don't wear a coat all day. We'll begin in 1 minute.
Bill,
Something to write with. This works. It does.
We have a quorum again.
We have a quorum. Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the regular meeting of the Traverse City Planning Commission. Today is August 7th. Calling this meeting to order. Do we need to do a roll call vote? A roll call, just roll call?
Commissioner Deturi,
Here.
Commissioner Hershey,
Here.
Commissioner Knapp,
Here.
Commissioner McGillivray,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson. Here. And so student liaison Madeline George, Commissioner Swanson, Commissioner Heller, and Commissioner O'Brien are all absent and excused.
Thank you. Do we have any announcements?
Yeah, we have a couple real quick. Madeline, our student liaison, today was supposed to be her last day, but her wisdom teeth removal surgery that was scheduled for later this week got bumped up to yesterday, so she's not able to make it.
Poor
So she was
Madeline.
a great asset to have, but she'll be leaving, I think, next week to Michigan State to start her college
Oh, good
career.
for her.
So
That's great.
she had some very complimentary things to say about this experience that we'll send to you via email. And then Shay O'Brien is not here. Him and his wife did have their baby girl, so he was planning to be here. He texted this afternoon after about 13 hours of sleep this week. He decided to sit it out, so we can kind of appreciate that. The Michigan Association of Planning will be holding its annual Planning Michigan Conference in Grand Rapids this year. That's September 25th through 27th. The annual planning department budget includes funds to cover your costs to go. We really strongly encourage planning commissioners to attend that conference. And then later in the fall, the Northwest Michigan Housing Summit, put on by Housing North, will be October 24th through 25th here in Traverse City. Another great opportunity to learn about what other communities are doing and some new resources and tools that are coming available. So Katie will be sending information out to you all about that. I think some has been sent about the planning conference already. So make sure you let her know if you would like to attend so that we can get you registered and fill out the necessary paperwork for your per diem and reimbursements and things like that. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Excellent. So we have approval of the minutes for May 21st, June 18th, and July 16th. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from May 21st, June 18th, and July 16th meetings.
Do we have support?
Support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I abstain from the May 21st minutes as I was not here.
Okay.
That moves us into old business. We have 3 public hearings this evening, and the first one is a public hearing in consideration of a zoning amendment application submitted by Andrew Mollison of Alliance Architects, authorized agent for the Traverse City Housing Commission, to rezone the property located at 10200 East Carter Road, commonly known as Orchard View Apartments, from RC Residential Conservation District to R3 Multifamily Dwelling District, and possible recommendation to the City Commission. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, so we received this application. It was introduced at our meeting last month in July. And the Housing Commission already operates an affordable housing multifamily development on this property. all 3 and 4 bedroom units geared towards families, one of the few locations in the region that has that unit type to serve that community need. However, as you all are aware, the need for more housing, and more specifically affordable housing, is quite acute in this region, and their market needs are changing. So not only would they like to build some additional units on that property, but add some 1 and 2 bedroom units to the mix, because that is what the market is indicating there's the greatest demand for. So a couple items. This project was originally approved in 1991. What you see out there, at that time, the property was zoned multifamily, and it was approved through a special land use permit. In 1999, the city zoning ordinance was completely rewritten and adopted with a new zoning map. And so the property changed zoning at that time from multifamily to residential conservation. I had an individual come in and speak to me about that earlier this week. And again, no one from staff was around in 1999, so we were trying to piece through the records. And as much as we could gather, it wasn't a rezoning of a specific parcel, but again, part of the overall rewriting of the zoning ordinance and the recreation of the zoning map that occurred at that time. However, in order to operate its mission to provide affordable housing, the Housing Commission relies on things such as pilots, which are payment in lieu of taxes from the local municipality, along with low-income housing tax credits from the state. So there's 2 points a year to apply for these highly competitive funds. The next round is October 1st that they're looking to apply for, but they would need the zoning to reflect what they are, what they are pursuing, but it's also kind of nice to have the zoning reflect what's there now, because what's there now is also legally non-conforming. So there were some concerns expressed, did some digging around. Yes, there was arsenic in that soil. That is not uncommon for this area. Much of this area was agriculture, specifically fruit orchards, and arsenic was used and sprayed all over the orchards. So since they took public money, to build that development, they had to work through Eagle and do an environmental assessment. And that's when a remediation plan was established that required them to remediate. As of 2021, they received a letter, which I distributed to you from Eagle, saying it's an NFA report, so no further action. In other words, the remediation has been successful. The arsenic levels are below that which is permitted for residential use. Speaking with the applicant, what was interesting is when he was digging through the records, some of the property Morgan Farms is located on now actually had much higher arsenic levels, but since they weren't recipients of public money, they did not have to go through the same remediation process that they were subject to. So just wanted to point that out. I also learned, just as a fact, that the city used to own that property until 2018. So it was a city property that they partnered with the Housing Commission to provide affordable housing at that location, but in 2018 transferred the deed to the Housing Commission. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chair Hershey.
Sure.
And I will note that the applicant is here, along with the property owner, staff, and I think they have a couple of points that they'd like to go over in the presentation.
Commissioners, do you want to make any comments first, or would you like to hear from the applicant first?
I'd like to hear from them.
Applicant, please come make your points.
You may just want to ask them to stay there.
Please state your name and whether you're a Traverse City resident.
Okay, my name is Andy Mollison. I am not a Traverse City resident. I'm working as an agent with the Housing Commission. And so I filed the application on behalf of Traverse City Housing Commission. So that was a terrific summary of the situation that the Housing Commission is in right now. They need to bring some more units online. Orchard View is one of their family developments. And as it said, I hate to repeat it, but it's pretty much all 3 and 4 bedroom units. But the need right now, and it has been a growing need, has been for 1 and 2 bedroom units. Just in review, to add on to what Sean had said, Riverview Terrace is pretty much all 1 bedroom units, but that's for senior living. So I think people often will inquire there, but we really need to find a place for families that have maybe one, just need an extra bedroom. And so this property lends itself to that pretty well. So we did bring today a conceptual site plan of what we are intending to do. And as Sean had said, you know, we're not necessarily committed to it, but this looks like the right solution. Presently, there's 20 units on the site. we're really looking to add about 30 units within 2 buildings. And we can't do it right now because right now it's a non-conforming site. 1 and 2 bedroom units are all that would be permitted on that site. There's also a density restriction, which we're pretty close on, but we're not quite where we need to be. Right now we're at 2.3 units per acre. As it's currently zoned, you could do 4.4 units per acre, but there's a large section that we really don't want to build on, can't really build on. That's on the west side of the property, so it somewhat restricts where we can build on the property. So we're looking to go a little bit higher than that number, and obviously we don't want 1 and 2 family bedrooms in order to make these units affordable. We've got to keep the cost of construction down, so we're looking at doing 2 buildings with stacked units, 1 and 2 bedroom units on them. So again, kind of keep the cost down as much as possible, and that fits within the LIHTC application that we're pursuing and the funding pro formas that we're going through. So that, you know, all these projects somewhat depend upon investor involvement, and so there's a certain sweet spot that we can hit where we can make a project viable. So that's what this site plan that you're seeing here represents. Let's see, the other thing that we have actually, I'm going to hand those out. Oh, Elisa, would you mind? These images that you see here were not in your packets, but the 11 by 17s are on that table back there. If you wouldn't mind handing those out to all of the commissioners. I think many people have already seen this, but for the sake of having a complete presentation, Elisa with the Traverse City Housing Commission will provide what's on these boards so you can see them a much better. So that's what's on the left-hand side here. On the right-hand side, this is just simply a little bit of a chronologic history of the neighborhood, the greater neighborhood. As I think you're probably all aware, this property is actually in Leelanau County, still within the city, of course. So, you know, it's kind of this central point where it's connecting to a lot of different things. But you can see from these images in 2003, you can see Orchard View's Phase 1 development. Those are we highlighted the buildings yellow so that you, just as a frame of reference, so you can see the ones that were built originally. And things are pretty rural back then, but again, there was a master plan for the city, and it seems like it's working out very well because this area did fill in with growth, and so we showed the 2015 aerial map where we haven't added any buildings on the property, and then we go to the 2022 aerial map, and you can see, you know, you see development in there. These are obviously, we're taking these off of off Google, so you can't see all the developments there today, but you can see that we've got roads and infrastructure and things. So what we're proposing is actually pretty consistent with this. This is the natural organic growth of communities, adding more units, adding more unit types. It's a very healthy cross section, or in the new urbanist movement, we refer to it to the transect, you know. And again, I'll point to the site development plan. If I think most people maybe are familiar, but if you're not, there's a couple of 3-plex and 4-plex houses on the southern border. These 4 white buildings right here, and those are kind of adjacent to where we're planning on building. So when you see our plan and see higher density housing on our southern border, that's kind of the higher density housing also of the northern border of the neighboring Morgan Farms, and from there it gets less dense. So we go from, you know, a 30-unit building to a series of 4-plexes, and then as you cross Carter Road, now you're into Leelanau and single-family housing, and there's quite a big buffer there too that I'd like to point out. There's an unusual situation with this site plan that was highlighted in the zoning exhibit, where Carter Road sweeps around on the northeast corner, but there was a large section that was kind of parceled out from, we couldn't find the history on when this happened, but the current records that we could find show that there's this stretch of easement, which looks like Carter Road may have been adjusted, but in talking with some other people more in the know on that, it sounds like that was more intended for a view easement for the cars that come around that corner, so that to make the corner more safe. So in other words, we can't really build in that area, and we're not planning on doing it. I'm going to point it out real quick here. This section here. It's not really economical for us to build there, but again, as we try to take high density housing and then change to medium density and low density, and then we're moving off into the rural area. So That's the intention of what we're trying to do out there. And it'll help the community, help the city, help residents who really need the help. I mean, some of these are going to be workforce housing. Some of these are just people who need assistance to be able to live with dignity in the community. So,
Thank you, sir. Commissioners, do you have questions for Mr. Mollison?
The one property you said you don't want to or can't build in on, so to the left, which I'm assuming is to the east or the west, why can't you build there?
well, the grade is an issue. It's pretty steep as we go west on this property. We're really going high, and there's actually a basketball court that's carved into the hillside, and we even looked at trying to put a building on there, and it's just we're battling the slope too much. And so in order to keep the project affordable, we don't really want to go into those areas. Now, we are going to have to deal with the grade change, but the more we can minimize that, the more viable this project gets to be. That area, there's actually a fence now that cuts through here. So that was separated in response to some of those arsenic levels that were referred to before. So at this point, we just prefer to leave that area fallow. Again, in some ways, that's somewhat keeping with the spirit of that residential conservation district, because it does help us keep our overall unit density low, and it gives us a little bit more space to the single-family houses that are to the west.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Could you remind us out of the size of the total parcel, and then what portion of it is in that fenced-off, unbuildable section?
Altogether, it's about 9 acres, 9.5 acres. And that area, I would estimate you're probably talking about maybe around 3 acres, maybe a third of the site is on that west side.
Thank you.
And we are kind of cheating into that area a little bit with the smaller of the two buildings. At this point, that one is intended to be 10 units. And the lower units would be accessible. That's another point that's worth mentioning, is that right now Orchard View has 2 handicap accessible units, and when we're done, we'll have 8 handicap accessible units. All of the ground floor units for the new buildings would be fully accessible. But because of the slope on that side, it looks like the 2 lower back ones, we may not be able to put a unit in there and be in conformance with the building code. So this building will somewhat be buried. So when you're on the west side of the property looking to the east, part of that building is going to be below grade a little bit. So again, that'll keep the bulk of these buildings somewhat concealed from view.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
As
ahead.
long as we have you here. Preparing for tonight's meeting, I was interested in some of the information about the original RC zoning, and I noticed that RC zoning does include a number of protections. I guess I don't know if that's the right terminology, but things like a maximum of 20% impervious surface, a maximum 45-foot building height, and then, of course, I'm presuming that the special land use permit gave variances for things like R1A, R1B limitations and things like that. So I guess I'd be interested in knowing whether you've gotten far enough into this to be able to comment about your plans for impervious surfaces and the building height. Well,
At this point, the 2 new buildings are intended to be 3 stories, and as I said, they're walkout basement level ones. So, how you calculate that actual building height can vary depending on where you're taking that from. But in all cases, they would be lower than 45, so they would be in conformance with the residential conservation district. Same thing with the impervious area. Partly considering that we're not really developing on the third of the site that's to the west, that won't be a problem. And even if we didn't, I'm pretty confident we'd be able to go well below, our impervious area is going to be well below the 45% of the developed area that's even within the fence line that currently exists as you see it right there. But other than that, yeah, the big thing that was really stymieing us on the residential conservation district was that it doesn't permit, it restricts you to single-family or duplex houses, and the overall density on the site, we just needed to get a few more units in there, so.
Thank you.
Anyone else for the applicant? Okay, so the public hearing is now open. If you have any comments to make, please come to the microphone, state your name and address, whether you're a Traverse City resident. And we have a 3-minute time limit.
Hi, I'm Barb Smith. I live at 10278 East Leelanau Court, which is right across the street from this area. And I was here in 1991, believe it or not. And so were our neighbors, so we really remember this. This area right here is our only problem. And I have to say, is we have very little problem. I don't think.
Ma'am, can you speak? Because this is being televised, so if you don't
I'm
speak
sorry.
into the mic,
We
no
have
one can
had
hear you.
very little problem with this development. Our kids go to the same schools, and it has not been a problem. So we're not opposed to more units at all. That's not the problem. The problem is where this exit comes out. Because there's a little bit more. Where the map doesn't show is that Morgan Farm exit is right below this. It's on a blind corner. So Leelanau Court comes out, this new exit comes out, Morgan Farms comes out on a blind corner. When this was first developed, that was the original thought, is to put that exit there. And they changed it. And Morgan Farms wasn't there. So we didn't have as much traffic as we do now. And we had people look at it, fire department, police department, all those kinds of guys, and they said that, yeah, that's a danger. And it's even worse now. So there is the basketball court area that isn't viable, according to what you said. Where the basketball court is, that's not a viable option. That's too bad, because that would be a perfect place. I don't know. Okay.
Ma'am, we're here to hear your comment.
Okay,
so-
not questions?
Yeah.
That's my comment, and that's where we were in 1991, long time ago, with this exit being there. But other than that, we really don't have a problem with it.
Well, thank
Just
you.
wanted you to know, we're not in my backyard.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny Young, 10519 Camrose Circle, which is within Morgan Farms, and our home directly abuts to this property being discussed this evening. I would like to urge the commissioners not to action this zoning change request tonight, as I believe there's insufficient information to make a well-informed decision. Specifically, there was nothing in the packet about the known arsenic contamination on this property. Although I do appreciate Mr. Winter providing me some additional information later, given the concerns that I had raised, I would like to share my insights on this report. Although Eagle declared the current occupied area as safe for residential use in 2021, there are several areas within the unoccupied area that exceed the direct contact criterion for arsenic, according to the state toxicologist who reviewed the site-specific plan for Orchard View Terrace as part of the commitment to Eagle to address this arsenic issue on the property. As a biochemist, I found the science of estimating the arsenic bioavailability specifically for the soil on this property in order to calculate a revised direct contact criterion to be quite interesting. However, at the end of the day, there are still 4 areas on that unoccupied property that exceed this criterion, in spite of the revised criterion being 3 times what the generic residential criterion is set at. In addition, there is nothing about the remediation plans for the arsenic if this expansion is ultimately approved. Given the seriousness of this issue, I highly recommend that the Planning Commission address the arsenic contamination as part of this zoning request to ensure that current tenants and surrounding homeowners are kept safe, and that the city does not risk exposing further citizens by allowing a high-density zoning on a property with unsafe arsenic levels. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is George Shankler. I am also a resident of Morgan Farms. I'm at 14081 Waterford Road. I'd say my house is about 150 feet from the border of this parcel. I'm right across the street from Jenny. My purpose tonight is to address, first of all, the arsenic issue. Sitting here tonight, I've heard some things that I was not aware of, and I'm not sure are the complete story. I did talk just this afternoon to a representative from Eagle, who is very familiar with this parcel and the history of it. And he indicated to me that in 2002, a due care letter was sent out and was adopted or filed or whatever, which is, it's kind of strange because nobody in the Traverse City government that we contacted had it, even though they supposedly were involved with creating it. So there's, and I didn't have a chance to review it before I came here, I just got it. But there's about 3 pages of requirements of due care for the site. Now, it was said that the remediation has been done and the state has said you're good to go. I'm not sure about that. The only remediation I'm aware of is building that fence to separate off the higher contaminated area from the rest of the situation, and then requiring a notification and agreement from tenants that they're aware of the contamination and that they agree not to mess around in there, not to dig. So I don't know if that's in your materials, but those are 2 things that I thought would be relevant to considering whether we need to look further at the contamination issue. Also, the report that was done in 2021 by Eagle, the toxicologist mentioned in that report that it should require further study. And the gentleman I talked to today, Brian Flickinger, said that even once, if there's going to be additional building on that parcel.
Sir, you had 3 minutes. We're over the 3 minutes.
Oh, I'm
thank
sorry.
You.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll just in 10 seconds. That there are certain standards that you'll have to meet when you do the construction to account for the contamination.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. Now, time it. Next person.
Hello,
Hello.
Janet Fleshman, 10471 Waterford. First, thank you for doing this volunteer work, 170-page packet. This is a big volunteer job. I hope everybody appreciates what you do.
Thank you.
I support housing here, and I support public housing here, if it's deemed absolutely safe to build. But to jump all the way from a residential conservation to R3 is extreme. And I think what you should be considering is not this proposed development, which has a lot to recommend it, but what you should be considering is what a full build out would look like. And frankly, I think that should be in the packet, and I think we should all see it. If we had thought in terms of a form-based code, as we discussed here many times, you could probably add a lot of housing right now and still recognize the contemporary neighborhood, which is called out in both the current master plan and the future, soon to be approved, we hope, master plan, and the surrounding area, and still add a lot of housing with a lot of variety in the housing. The types of housing that I think could be incorporated include duplexes, townhouses, small apartments of the type you see tucked into numerous suburban and urban neighborhoods, and even courtyard layouts that could accommodate multifamily dwellings. And I would like to see an even wider variety of units, so I appreciate what is here in this plan. Continually bearing in mind that we are not approving this plan here, it's just a zoning jump from residential conservation all the way to R3. R2 seems to be the closest to the kind of housing that I'm thinking of, but it just doesn't allow for the type of variety of housing that we would need to give us enough units to accommodate people, and I certainly would like to accommodate people, and people at different stages of their lives. I do see that later in the packet, you'll be discussing using PUDs for smaller properties. So with R2 not really meeting the needs and R3 being a much more intense build out than this is and going all the way to a 70% impervious surface, I'm not sure we have the right thing right there. With some of these things in mind, I think you could do something a little more creative and make this like a poster child for accommodating a site that may need to be remediated, a lot of housing, and honoring the residential conservation area, and both the master plans, frontward and backwards. I know that you're not a scientific board, so I know that that's not in your purview, but with the Michigan Planning Enabling Act calling for health, safety, and welfare to be the prime consideration of planning commissions, I would certainly want to know what the possible issues are. And again, I think this board has the ingenuity to work around it and make this a really
3
good
minutes.
development.
Thank you, Ms. Fleshman.
I timed it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Terry Leeser, and I live on Camrose Circle. And I also am in favor of additional low-income housing in Traverse City. Our neighborhood under the current master plan is TC2, and under the new plan, the way I understand it, it's a contemporary neighborhood. And they describe that as larger lots, lower density residential developments. They have curvilinear streets and suburban development patterns. R3 does not fit that description. R3 belongs in core neighborhoods or transitional neighborhood classifications. R1 or R2 would be more appropriate for a contemporary neighborhood. Changing this to R3 is effectively spot zoning, and it doesn't conform to the master plan. This is not a place for 3-story apartment buildings like we have at the Legends. The Legends are, they're fine for what they are, but that's a transitional neighborhood. That's not R3. We have no public transportation in our area. Duplexes or townhouses would be more appropriate. The executive summary is misleading because it's talking about the density before and after, and it's not really true if you take, because you're just talking about open space. This is dense. The other thing that Mr. Mollison talked about, he said now. This is what they know, what they think they're going to do now. If we get this R3, they could come in and do anything they want with very little approval. We could have 5 or 6 3-story buildings there. It could look like the Legends. And that is not what this is supposed to be. So I thank you for your time, your consideration.
Sure.
Richard Robbins, 720 Center Place, resident Traverse City. I'm representing actually an alliance of TART Trails, Norte, Cherry Capital Cycling Club, Groundwork, the Disability Network of Northern Michigan. This is a alliance which you'll hear a little bit more about in the map discussions later on. But
Mr. Robbins, are you speaking
Yes,
about
I
this
am.
particular
Yes, I am.
project? Okay.
But introducing myself as to who I'm
Okay,
representing,
okay.
is the one thing that I have not actually looked at the packet directly, but one of the things I'm hoping we've incorporated is protected lanes of non-automotive transportation infrastructure in this development. It was mentioned that there is no public transportation to this area, and as we continue to start to build these, we have to start building corridors, safe corridors for biking, running, walking, and disability access that is protected from protected lanes versus automotive. And so hoping that that was a part of the plan and/or it can be incorporated, because in every one of these requests, we as an alliance are going to be looking for that type of support by the City Commission and the Planning Commission. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Scott Springer, 10627 Waterford Road. Been in the Morgan Farms community for about 4 years now. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak today. I would like to thank the Planning Commission members for all your service and dedication to Traverse City. I can only imagine your roles are challenging, but also critical to keeping our city beautiful. As you heard before me, my fellow neighbors have expressed concerns about the proposed rezoning of the Orchard View Terrace property adjacent to Morgan Farms. I'd like to record show that we recognize the need for and support the development of affordable housing in the Traverse City area. This helps to create an opportunity for everyone to be able to call this beautiful city home. However, the Morgan Farms community feels the process is moving a little too quickly for rezoning and that we've been treated a little bit unfairly. For starters, our Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, has not been fulfilled and has now been delayed 2 weeks. The arsenic levels are still a major concern, even with the comments that have been made by the commission, that it seems there should be a little bit more due diligence involved with this type of decision. The last thing we want to do is ignore the details and put families at risk because we know that there's going to be children housed in the affordable housing. Also stating that the current Orchard View apartment housing does not comply with RC zoning currently, it should be irrelevant and should not justify this zoning change to R3. Our community has already had a negative experience with the Legends Apartments next to us on M72. 4 buildings were originally proposed there, and now there's 8. This is very high density, and we can only imagine what would happen if the rezoning of Orchard View is put to R3 and they basically have unlimited building on that property. Additionally, there was brought up the concern about the new entrance near Carter Road. I want to go on the record saying that this is a major concern, major safety concern for Morgan Farms as well. Between the two 90-degree turns, there is a blind spot there that it just is not a good situation as it currently sits. So in summary, our community is in support of increasing the amount of affordable housing, as I stated. However, the Orchard View Terrace property would be better suited as R1 or R2 if building on this land is proven to be safe. We believe R3 is too dense for the neighborhood and that the current proposed renderings need to be reconsidered so as to include the appropriate noise buffer to existing communities and allow for a better distribution of density in such a small area. Thank you very much.
Anyone else have a comment? Okay, please come to the mic.
Hello, I'd just like to make a few comments. My name is
Your name, please.
Yeah, my name is Harry Gillen. I am at 10613 Waterford Road, and my wife and I just bought this house in March of this year, and we welcomed our first child, a baby girl, on July 17th. So I'm very concerned about the development of the neighborhood and the development of the surrounding area as regards to my family as it grows. I'm from Traverse City. I was born here and raised here. I understand the need for increasing the inventory of housing in Traverse City and making this a more affordable place for all. I talk to members of the community all the time, and I understand that people in lower income brackets who are essential to the economy in this town are being priced out, and it's a major concern for everybody who cares about the future of the city, and something that I care about very deeply. So it was important for me to attend here today and get a better understanding of the development that will be taking place right just about 150 feet from where I live. So I want to echo a few concerns that I've heard here tonight. The one is the concern regarding the blind spot of the road coming in and out of Carter Road. I enter and exit through this road every day, and I'll be driving with my daughter, so that's a very important concern of mine that we know that the traffic and that the safety of this road is taken into consideration. I haven't heard anything regarding the building of a fence of any kind that separates these two properties, and whether or not there will be any kind of buffer between this area and Waterford Road and Morgan Farms. Right now, there only exists a chain link fence, and so I just would be mindful of the development of regarding that area. And last, I would just love to know, make sure that the whole process is transparent regarding the arsenic levels that I've heard from my neighbors and from people in the community on this development. So I'd just like to take this moment to make my voice heard. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to stand here and speak, and thank you for your time.
Carl Fulmer. I'm director of the Traverse City Housing Commission. Excuse me. I live in Peninsula Township. I grew up on a cherry orchard, so I know a little bit about arsenic. First, I want to say thank you to everybody who came tonight. We're not trying to cram anything down anybody's throat here, but what we are trying to do is thoughtfully add to the development that is Orchard View. What we're proposing is roughly 5.5 units per acre. As Mr. Mollison said earlier, we have no interest in developing up the hillside. The steeper grades make it much more expensive to develop the hillside, which doesn't really fit with our pro forma. R3 was the zoning district that really fit the needs of the type of development that we have to do to produce housing units at a relatively affordable level. Compared to 20 years ago, it's not affordable at all as far as construction costs go. But we use public money to do all of our developments. That means Eagle reviews every development proposal we have. And so we will have to mitigate any sort of arsenic in the soil that Eagle deems unsafe. That's the reality of using public money. Now, Morgan Farms to our south, which incidentally was Orchard at one point in time as well, didn't have to subject itself to the same reviews. So the soils in Morgan Farms, more than likely, were never mitigated. So I just want to make that clear. So we do not intend to build any more than what you see in your plan. We hesitated to submit a site plan because we didn't want to get into a formal discussion of a site plan rather than the need for housing and the increase in zoning. I've heard from Morgan Farms residents that we have been decent neighbors and good neighbors. And we intend to continue that into the future. And so all I want to say is we ask that we are granted our rezoning request. We intend to still be good neighbors to Morgan Farms. I do thank you for your time, and I thank you for everybody from Morgan Farms' time too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fulmer. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Right, then I'm going to close this public hearing and bring it back to the commissioners. Yes.
Yes, echoing some of what Mr. Fulmer just said. This is a rezoning request. We are not approving a site plan. We have a site plan presented to us. It is tentative. Right. Having been through a number of potential public housing developments, the initial site plan rarely looks like what finally gets built because it has to go through not just various administrative approvals and zoning issues, but there's the issues of how much financing is available and what can be built, and any limitations about engineering work, soil contamination, wetlands, airport air rights. there's a lot of different factors that can play into what actually gets built, and it doesn't look like what was envisioned at the very beginning. Similarly, where buildings are located or where driveways are located is not part of this request. We have something drawn up. That's what something could look like. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get those two buildings in that configuration. I don't expect that we'd be getting more than two buildings of 30 to 36 units total. But that is what's proposed in the broader schema of a rezoning request.
That is correct. What's before us is
Yeah,
the
what's
zoning amendment.
request, changing from one category to another category.
Correct.
To address another issue that was brought up of this being an area not served by public transit, that is factually untrue. While the Beta line Route 10 to Sutton's Bay does not go directly past this property, it does go down M22, and the Beta Village loops do allow deviations of 3/4 miles from the posted route. This property is a half mile, so Route 10 can and does deviate to Orchard View. So it is effectively on a public transit route.
Thank you, Mr. Treadwell.
A couple things to that.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add that Mitch is correct. This is, the request before the Planning Commission is for the change in zoning only. To help you understand, we had plenty of conversations with the applicant about putting in this conceptual plan. They're working on this because they need to have some sort of plan and a certain level of detail to apply for the state funding, which they plan to do in August. There are limitations as the owners of this property. Their mission is limited to providing affordable housing. So I just want to point that out so other uses aren't there. But because they are limited, they're not a for-profit developer. They don't receive tax revenue. Public funding is the only way that they can do development. So this is the first expansion of the development in 33 years. So the likelihood of that happening again in the near term probably isn't great, because when it comes to the state funding, the cards are stacked against us. It's very competitive. We don't score as well as more urbanized areas downstate and stuff like that. So, and it's also not a guarantee. If I recall, I think Thibault Flores took multiple years of applying for funding before it actually got awarded and is under construction now. So the other thing that was discussed at the last meeting is, should they get that state funding, I believe it is a 45-year deed restriction that is placed on the property, so it will stay as affordable housing for that time period. Beta was mentioned by Mitch. Another great service, and this is just a general comment, that Beta offers is their link service. So it's on demand, and that's just a benefit to the public. Like if you're going to the airport and you don't want to pay to park, call them, schedule a pickup, they'll pick you up, take you, and same thing. It's a way to save some money. As far as bike lanes and stuff, we don't have any jurisdiction over that road. It's a Leelanau County Road Commission street, so it would be up to them to work on that. Driveway locations, we don't permit the driveway locations either. So that would be the Leelanau County Road Commission that would make that final determination based on their standards. Will there be a second driveway? I would say likely yes. The fire department likes to have a second point of entrance in case there's an emergency that blocks one entrance, that they can still access it. Should this get approved by the Planning Commission, which I'd like to point out, any decision the Planning Commission makes today regarding the rezoning is just a recommendation. It then goes to the City Commission for a final determination. So you're just making a recommendation to the City Commission. But in order to do any kind of construction, they would need all applicable permits, including stormwater permits, fire permits, utility permits, land use permits. So all applicable standards will be reviewed. However, in talking with the city attorney, it is not the city's role, or nor do they have the authority to enforce the state's environmental regulations. So that's the agency known as EGLE that does that. So she made a point to emphasize that it's not the responsibility of the city or the Planning Commission for that purpose. So that's it.
Thank you. Mr. McGillivray, Commissioner McGillivray.
A couple questions. So can the applicants confirm there is a 45-year deed restriction on the property for this project? And is there any other deed restrictions on the property you can do that in a minute. So Carter Road is all Leelanau County, Mr. Winter? That's interesting. This is a conceptual site plan. I recognize that it's, and I thought, and I understand when they can change, it's conceptual. You've got a lot of steps to go through. There seemed to be a lot of concern about that driveway access and the existing driveway access on Morgan Farms. I said, well, at least that brought this to light and maybe we can address it. But apparently we can't. So you can try to address it, but not with the city. It's going to have to be with, so my advice is for people to reach out to city engineering is going to be to talk to Leelanau County about it. The concerns you have for that road. It is, I've been up that road multiple times. It's, it could be better. The site could be better. The arsenic, if we didn't allow construction on contaminated property in this city, 75% of the city wouldn't be built. It's got to be remediated. It'll be done to everyone's liking. Probably not. It never is. But it's a non-issue for me.
But it's up to the state to determine all of that.
I think it is a large upzoning from a resource to multiple family. I don't disagree with that. I don't know why it's that. I don't know why it was ever zoned that. How do you zone a multiple, unless you did the whole property, and that's why Morgan Farms is a PUD. So, and I think that a PUD would have been a great idea, but that's not what's before us. I have to agree with Ms. Fleischman. That would have been probably more appropriate to do something like that. But I think the rezoning I don't think the existing zoning is appropriate. And so I can't disagree with that. And I think it is relevant that you've got a multiple family property that was allowed and is now and then was rezoned into non-compliance. And what the purpose of that was, I don't know, but the city owned it at the time, so they probably didn't care. Or maybe they had some other ideas, I don't know. I was on the city commission when we transferred the property to you. I don't know if there's any restrictions on your ability to sell that property or not. I'm assuming we probably stuck something in there, but I'd like that clarified. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
If I could follow up on Ms. Fleischman's and Mr. McGillivary's comments about the jump in zoning from RC to R3, were any alternatives to R3 zoning seriously explored?
Not really. I mean, when we had the conversations with the applicant and we looked at the property, I mean, yes, it's a jump from RC to R3, but it was a jump to go from R3 to RC with the existing development there already. And so they, being a 33-year-old apartment, by moving to R3, that would legalize what is there today, what was in place at the time when it was approved, the type of zoning. And with not having a legally non-conforming status, you remove a lot of barriers to property owners, such as financing, selling, insuring, and things like that. Some of those financial institutions get very nervous when you have a legal non-conforming status. They want to make sure that the asset could be rebuilt in an emergency or things like that. But this also then would establish their rights moving forward. So let's, again, they completely rely on public funding. So what they can do on that property is dependent on what type of funding is available. If Congress passes an act and sends $50 million to Michigan for affordable housing, they may be able to expand within the rights under the R3 and take advantage of that opportunity, where if you have like a PUD or something else, you're more locked in. So really there's no other district that would legalize what is already there without also introducing commercial components, which we didn't feel was appropriate for that location, nor did the master plan support that. So,
thank you.
Yep.
Any other
Yes, this is, I guess, going at staff, but I can understand both the seemingly contradictory statements that this is a significant jump from RC to R3, and that RC actually reflects multifamily structures that are there now. But it makes it curious, both in the existing zoning map, why it is RC. Apparently, we don't know the answer to that. But also why in the current master plan and the future master plan, there's no examination of the fact that we have multifamily housing, both on this property and in Morgan Farms immediately to the south, that both of our master plans say is not in character with contemporary neighborhood. While this area does have more modern buildings, speaking about Morgan Farms, for example, more modern buildings and curvilinear streets, compared to the base of Old Mission, you do have houses that are much closer together in places. You do have, as we see directly to the south of this, multifamily housing in terms of triplexes and quadplex. And if you look at the Elmwood Township plans to the north, which would seem to be, yes, a master plan is looking at your municipality, but it would seem reasonable to look at what other adjacent municipalities have for their zoning outlook to see if it aligns or does not. They currently in their zoning plan have R3 zoning directly to the north across Carter Road, and very close, light industrial or general commercial districts. And their future land use map from the Elmwood Township Master Plan lists this entire corner of Greilicville as high-density residential, which we are effectively making with this rezoning and what it already is. So it just raises the questions in my mind why we don't have an allowance for higher residential density looking through the master plan, especially as that's going forward.
I mean, if there's a specific question.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't understand what your question is. I mean, in
Yeah.
the R3 multifamily dwelling district, it allows for single-family, two-family, duplex, triplex, quadplex, and multifamily.
Yes, but in the master plan, our future land use map doesn't show a higher density of residential use, and why our master plan was written in such a way, and that wasn't raised as an issue.
Well, I mean, it depends how you look at and define density. If you're looking at density as being defined by whether or not there's more than one unit in a structure, yeah. But if you're looking, density is really the number of dwelling units per acre is how it's defined. And when you look at this development, existing and proposed, it's still significantly less than Central Neighborhood's density, Morgan Farms density, and things like that. It clocks in at a much lower density. Yes, there is the concern that, you know, with R3, there isn't a limit to density. We've kind of eliminated that throughout the zoning ordinance over
There
the last
are,
20
based
years.
on how
But
big
your
buildings
limits-
can be.
Yes, but you are limiting the size of the development and impervious surface. What's being proposed, R3, has the same height as what's there today with the zoning, not the building. So you could build a 45-foot single-family home today on that property. And that's what would be allowed under the R3 as well. Now, and to your comment about Leelanau County, just keep in mind, R3, R2, R1, those don't have standard meanings. So we use R3 for multifamily. That doesn't mean that Elmwood Township R3 is multifamily. That's why we're trying, you'll see in the field of planning, we're trying to get away from that because it is kind of confusing to people because it's not used uniformly, even though I think that was the intent when people started incorporating that. More of a strong Euclidean form of zoning.
So to clarify, what you're saying is this, as proposed, this development, would still meet density guidelines. But what I'm hearing on the other side is that by rezoning it to multiple family, based on the zoning and what's allowed in the future, whether practical or not, it could actually be beyond the density that's called for in the current or future land use or master plan. So my question is, so I think that's maybe something we need to take a look at as we go through finalizing our master plan later tonight and at our next meeting, but also, can we approve a zoning that we don't feel is a rezoning that's in compliance with our existing master plan?
You know, that's up for you all to decide and make your own interpretation on is it consistent or not. You know, when you look at that whole area,
But generally, isn't that though going to be decided by a judge?
well, it depends if it gets to that point.
Yeah.
You know,
But so I'm curious about that. And that gives me a questionable pause if the rezoning is in compliance with the current master plan.
I mean, from my perspective, when I looked at it and we wrote the report, I would say, yeah, you know, they're likely not going to develop that western half because of contamination in the grades and things like that. So you're going to have a balance of open space added to the calculated density on that property for some time, probably into perpetuity, honestly.
But there's no guarantees. I mean,
yeah, I would agree. And there's no guarantee that a commission next year could rezone all of it to commercial too. You know, I mean,
no,
zoning's
and
never
I understand
zoning's
that,
never a
but
promise, I guess.
But
is the
I
point.
understand that, but that's not the, that's not the question in front of us.
Mhm.
The question in front of us is, one of the questions is, does the zoning comply with the master plan? And I understand your interpretation, it does. Your interpretation, maybe not.
Ultimately,
That gives me pause.
Well, yeah, and again, that's the role of this body is to make that interpretation. So we provided our perspective in the report, but that's for you all to discuss and decide. So, and it's important too to think about some of the other aspects that the city and the Planning Commission, City Commission are working on. As we talked at the onset of this discussion, there's a strong need for affordable housing in this community. There's about 3 developers or organizations that are providing that: Homestretch, Traverse City Housing Commission, and Woda Cooper Companies.
And I don't think that's in question. That's not debatable. It's not the issue. I
So
was
I'm
fine
gonna
with
go
this
ahead
until
and,
the
can I
question.
finish my point though,
Yeah.
Ryan? Thank you. So with that, if that's a need and a priority that the city's trying to achieve, we know that it is challenging to achieve that goal. It's probably the most challenging type of housing to achieve. So when you have these opportunities before you, that's the balancing act that you all have to do. How do we meet this need? How are we implementing the master plan? How are we serving the community best? And so those are the things that you need to keep in mind as you are expressing this, because it's easy to say, well, we should do it somewhere else. Well, if the Housing Commission doesn't own that property somewhere else, then they're not going to be able to provide that necessary. So,
And I'm not saying we should do it somewhere else. I'm saying that, my question is, should we be approving this if it's not in compliance with the existing master plan? And we clearly need to, if we address it in the future master plan, does that kind of give us a pass on this? In other words, I'm not, I don't know. I mean, I didn't realize it until you pointed it out, just how limiting those neighborhoods could be. I didn't think about it. Now I'm thinking about, why are we not allowing multiple family housing in those? Why is it not appropriate in those transitional neighborhoods, or those, whatever we used to call them, not the transitional ones. Contemporary. Yeah. We've been down that road before.
well,
I'm
and
not a
that's
big
where
fan of it, but
I think
term,
that's
but-
an important thing to know is it doesn't say multifamily is not allowed or multifamily is allowed. Future land use categories are broadly defined as being like low to moderate density housing. It doesn't say single family or duplex. So that's where, when it comes to things like the contemporary, the transitional, when you all go to work after the master plan on implementing any of those changes, that's where you'll have to look at each of them in a context-specific lens to determine, okay, given this area and the development around it, what would be appropriate? Because what you see in the current master plan, for instance, what might be TC4, future land use category. It talks about that being zoned to different zoning classifications in different parts of the city. In other words, it's not uniformly applied within.
I'm trying to find the definition of the contemporary.
Are there any limits on that property to, I keep looking at, I'll say to the left, because I don't know if these pictures are north, south, east, west, or what.
Yeah, they're all north oriented to the top.
Okay.
Yep.
So, are there any limits on that property that they say is unbuildable to the west?
In what way do you mean limits?
Well, I mean, they fenced it off, so they've got issues with it, but is it deed restricted in any way?
That may be a question to the applicant. As I understand it, the remediation has not occurred in the undisturbed section. Is that correct? The fence separating the two parts of the property, the developed and the undeveloped. In the undeveloped, has it been remediated yet? Yeah. Not to my, based on the trees there, I'm going to say no, because they wouldn't be there if the soil had been removed. Yeah. So that being said, knowing that there is remediation there, Eagle would require them to clean it up if they were to develop there.
Right, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But if they're not intending to develop there, maybe they just restrict it to not develop there ever. In which case, the density is more guaranteed because that property's, I mean, you can say they don't plan on building there ever, but, you know, it doesn't mean they won't in the future. I don't care how difficult it gets. I understand it's probably highly unlikely, but
We can't
because of that.
possibly know that, and what we have to decide tonight is not what the future projects would look like, but does this zoning classification work?
Well, I think the zoning classification works other than it may not be in compliance with the master plan. And that gives me pause. I don't have enough information to understand our role when looking at this, because that's one of the things it says, is we're supposed to determine if it's in compliance with the master plan. And I'm hearing two different things, and I'm undecided on that, which makes it hard for me to say, yes, I have no problems with rezoning this to multiple family. I mean, I've addressed all my, concerns and issues, but other than somebody threw a kink into it.
I'm fine with it, for the record.
And the
Just to
definitions.
throw it back.
Yeah, the definitions of both TC2 are in your packet and the contemporary.
Page 4.
Page 4, TC2 starts on page 3. TC2, which is the future land use category under the current master plan that's been in place since 2009, does talk about TC2 being primarily 1 and 2 family, but with multifamily interspersed throughout. So it does give a node to that. Contemporary neighborhood has a longer definition. Mitch hit most of it in his description, though. But yeah, a lower density, curvilinear streets, suburban development pattern. They're walkable, but they don't have the same degree of connection and amenities as core neighborhoods. So that would be like the things like the sidewalks and things like that. Again, they're intended to function more suburban, maintaining proximity to the urban amenities of the commercial core. So when I read that, that's saying like, yes, it shouldn't be a district that would allow commercial in there, because it's talking about being proximate to commercial and various amenities, but not itself being that purpose.
And that's why you determined that that designation fit what is currently there.
Mm-hmm. And it's the same future land use category, which encompasses all of Morgan Farms, which has single family on larger lots, duplexes, townhomes, multifamily. It's a variety there. And again, it's still not at a density that you would typically see even in our core neighborhoods, where we have narrow lots, houses close together, and things like that. When you look at it at a per acre basis, the amount of development that you're able to put in there.
If you look at neighboring areas, Morgan Farms has so much more density. This is far less dense to me. So it makes sense. It's a better use of the property. To me, it fits both the current and future master plan definitions. RC was clearly lobbied to exist because it's only in very particular areas of the city. It's a little strange to me. And the fact that this specific spot within RC was allowed to become this property through spot zoning and then was never fixed by planning is part of the problem and challenges that we have within the city, is trying to rectify what has been done and provide more uniform but unique to the regions of the city, uses.
I agree with that completely. And so I'm looking at page 3 of 8 on page 16 of 160 pages. And this is a direct quote from the intent. TC2 conventional neighborhood is at least formally developed to the two types of residential neighborhoods. The focus is on single-family residential. Multiple family is minimally interspersed and low in density. Okay, well, that answers the question. Should have highlighted that part for me. I mean, look, I agree with everything you said. It was a technical issue for me.
Yeah.
That's all.
And that's why we have these conversations.
And that's works for me. I don't feel like I'm going against the existing master plan. So I'm good. And we can address whether we can make sure that that language is included in the future land use plan.
I did also Google the definition of R3 in Leelanau, and they have a lot of R districts, and it's very confusing. Like R1, R2, R3, RC, RSRM. I went down a rabbit hole, but it's okay. They're pretty medium to high density in the 3SM districts.
Any other thoughts? If not, I would entertain a motion from someone, and that's on page 8.
Actually, you'll probably want to look at the cover memo, because
Oh, I didn't see
page
that.
8 is the end of the initial staff report when it was introduced,
Oh,
and
sorry.
that is the motion to set the public hearing from.
I didn't see it in
Next
there.
page, it's at the end of that.
Oh,
Page 2.
sorry, page 2.
Yeah.
2. Sorry, yes, page 2.
I move that the application request submitted by Andrew Mullison of Alliance Architects, authorized agent for the Traverse City Housing Commission, to rezone the property at 10200 East Carter Road, commonly known as Orchard View Apartments, from RC, Residential Conservation District, to R3, Multiple Family Dwelling District, to be recommended to the City Commission for approval.
We have a
Second.
Okay, we have a support and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Carl, I will get with the clerk's office to see when this will go to the city commission and let you know. It'll have one meeting where it'll be introduced, and then 2 weeks later, they'll act on it, so.
Thank you. Okay, let's give everybody a chance to move out of here, and we're going to go to, oof. Okay, while people are moving out, I want to move ahead to the next.
Want him to keep these? Or do you want us
Do you mind keeping them? Do you need them? I don't need them. Okay, that way if public comes in and has questions, we can use them as a reference. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank
Nice meeting
you.
you.
Okay, we have to move on, please. Thank you. We're moving on to our next public hearing, a public hearing in consideration of the application submitted by Alex McKenzie of Coldwell Banker Commercial Schmidt Realtors to amend Section 1358.01 of the Traverse Code of Ordinance to permit offices, legal services, business services, and real estate service as allowed uses in the H1 Hospital District and possible recommendation. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, so this is, instead of a map amendment, a text amendment application that was introduced at the last meeting, specifically to add an additional use to the H1 district. So we have two hospital districts over on the west side of the city, H1 and H2, that are limited primarily to medical and medical-related uses. The difference being H2 allows for hospitals, H1 does not. So Munson will be located within the H2 boundary. The applicant is a realtor representing a property owner who's been trying to find tenants for this vacant building and is having difficulty with the limited uses in that district. We have been hearing quite a bit from different property owners and businesses. As you're probably aware, the economy has been changing quite a bit in the last 5 years, ever since COVID. We do know that we have a lot of vacant office space. But much of that vacant office space is large footprint office space, and it's located downtown. Not every business wants to be located downtown, and as we learned from the applicant requesting the rezoning of the Ida Tompkins building, that they were finding a strong market for smaller office spaces, which the vacant office space we have, again, is large format and not meeting that need. So a little bit of a disconnect there. So this individual has submitted the application, and I don't know, is Alex here today? Oh, Alex is here, thank you. We've only communicated via email, so haven't met him in person. So Alex could speak more of his experiences and things like that through there. I do understand the desire to make sure space in that district is available for hospital use, but we are getting, you'll notice in the draft master plan, away from that strict Euclidean zoning where only these type of uses can go here. In fact, the action plan specifically calls to making sure that we're allowing healthcare uses in other part of the cities as a way to have equitable access. So again, kind of moving towards more of a form-based code hybrid where you're focusing more on how the buildings are developed and less on the individual uses that can occur within them, and that makes our built environment more resilient to adapting to economic needs.
I also want to point out that in the packet, and we discovered this last time too, that there are a number of additional uses allowed in H1, including multifamily dwellings, places of worship, financial institutions, restaurants, banks, that have nothing to do with hospital use. That's already allowed in H1. Does anyone wish to speak to the applicant?
I have questions, but
All
I
right.
think perhaps more for our planning
Okay.
director.
All right.
Is this an appropriate time?
Well, I've got to open up the public hearing first and to see if there's anybody from the public who would like to speak on this public hearing topic. All right, now is the time.
Lovely.
I'll
Thank
close
you.
the public hearing, sorry.
I did some exploration and found the change that I believe is for this parcel, perhaps a somewhat not exactly aligned section, but including 220 Circle Drive, which is the Milliken Medical Building. Back in 2002, it looks like it experienced the change from H1 to H2, and I wondered if there had been any other zoning changes previously for the particular parcels that are at hand. I also noted in looking at our current master plan, way at the end, there was a note that said, additional uses that residents and employees would find useful on a regular basis should be added to the H1 district uses. And it was planned for a short-term recommendation, so within a one-year period from the 2009 approval. And I wondered why that had never been implemented.
Why the recommendation?
Why the short-term recommendation in our current master plan didn't happen.
I couldn't tell you.
I wasn't here.
I wasn't.
There was a lot of recommendations in our current master plan
Yeah, I
that
think-
never happened. Huge sections of it.
Yeah, and that's the reality of every plan.
So should we just kind of look at the current master plan with a grain of salt? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I think it's important to note that a master plan is not a mandate. It's a list of recommended actions in order to fulfill the vision that the plan created through the community engagement process.
I was just a bit surprised to see that something that seemed that straightforward hadn't actually been acted upon.
It might have been deprioritized because maybe the need hadn't come to the community yet. So they were like, well, I don't know, maybe they were in a similar situation where it was housing was a need. This is not true, but maybe it were. And so they were focusing on that instead. So office spaces and extending uses just didn't take higher priority at that point.
And then I'm also interested that the alignment of the current Munson Master Site and Facilities Plan, I guess from 2016, does it show all of these parcels as H1 zoning?
We have nothing to do with the Munson's plan.
Well, I mean, they're.
Are you talking about the
they
master
butt up.
the
Yeah,
master
the
facility
Munson
plan?
Master Site and Facility Plan seems to be directly contiguous to these particular parcels, and it looked to me as though one was indicating some land that was H1 when I thought it was H2, and there seemed to be some overlap or lack of clarity as those abutted. So I was curious about that. And then finally, I just did want to clarify, you mentioned vacancy of, is the major parcel here that's for sale is at 220 Circle Drive? Because I think that practice just moved out at the end of March, so it's been vacant for 4 months, perhaps.
you like to
I'm sure that, yeah.
You have to come up here and give your name.
Yep.
And whether you're a Traverse City resident, your address.
Yeah, my name is Alex McKenzie. I reside in Acme Township right now, but I work in Traverse City. I am the applicant. So the property you're referring to is 224 Circle Drive. It's the Milliken Medical Building. Munson occupied most of that building for a long time, and they vacated back in April. They didn't execute their right to make an offer and purchase it. So right now, one of the owners is still occupying a very small footprint in the building, but we've been having trouble, finding a buyer. I believe that, if we open up some of the allowed uses to accommodate more professional office uses, accounting firm, law firm, real estate brokerage, those kind of uses, it'll make it easier to move my properties. That's why I'm here.
May I ask a further question, which is there a typical, given current market conditions, typical time on market for a commercial property such as this?
This one's unique. Typically I see 6 to 9 months for something to go into contract. This one could take longer, but, Milliken Medical Properties, it's a 18,000 square foot building above ground, about 9,000 square feet underground, usable basement space. It's really set up for at least 4 or 5 individual office users. So, the chances of finding one large user to come in that isn't Munson or 5 or 6 independent medical practices is going to make it difficult, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Anna.
No, I don't have a question for the applicant. I don't know why we're talking about this property.
We shouldn't be. We should be talking about the
We're
district.
talking about
Designation.
making a change to the zoning.
Correct.
Correct.
Whether the applicant is having a hard time leasing his property is really immaterial to our decision, what's best for this zone. And that's what we should be talking about, not about their issues or their problems or making assumptions about it. My question is, why don't we allow these uses currently in the district? And what is the rationale for not doing that? And then my other question is, I have three questions. My other question is, where don't we allow health services? And it seems to be very broadly defined because, I mean, there's doctors and dentists and other health services throughout commercial zones. You did give me the graph. I did not get a chance to look at it very carefully. And there was an asterisk next to a number of them where it showed what zones health services are allowed. And that asterisk means refer to the ordinance for further detail. So, and I guess the question is, why are we limiting health services to just this neighborhood? Because there is a trend going on, and I don't know if it's material or not, but everyone's noticed Munson has bought up a lot of practices, and sometimes they buy the buildings. They used to buy the buildings too. They're not doing that anymore. And so, a lot of these doctors or practices are getting bought out, and then they have the building, and it's, and so where they go and what they do, we should be, like I said, making the health services accessible to everyone. And I'm not quite sure why we don't allow it. I'm sure there was some justification at the time. If someone's got a justification for it now, I'd like to hear it. But again, that's my question. The other question I had, I don't remember what it was. I had three. I gave you two.
Okay, I'll start with the most
those.
recent one. I might have to ask you to restate the first one. So I think you're hitting on a good question, Brian, that is, again, more reflective to what I had mentioned earlier, that idea of Euclidean zoning, which has nothing to do with geometry. We talked about this in October, is based on the Supreme Court case out of Euclid, Ohio, which did say, yes, zoning is a legitimate government purpose, and therefore it is a legal act. But Euclidean zoning was all about the strict separation of uses. So where you have a place where you can allow healthcare, a place for office, a place for resident, a place for industrial. Over the last 25 years, we've been untangling that web and allowing more uses. Outside of maybe a more comprehensive rewrite of the ordinance, we're going to probably keep dealing with these one-off issues of, can we add this use in this district? Can we add this use here? And things are evolving, as I mentioned earlier, with our economy right now. Healthcare, there probably was a public interest in preserving land for that purpose. Nowadays, people are doing doctor's appointments online. They're doing their therapist appointments online. That physical space need isn't the same. The office market is changing quite a bit, as we know as well. My biggest concern within the mission of protecting health, safety, and welfare is ending up in a situation where you have vacant buildings that can't be occupied. That's not serving anyone. And then I have concerns that come with what they refer to as the broken window hypothesis. Go by State and Pine right now and look at those buildings that are vacant. When buildings are vacant, they get vandalized, vagrancy happens, they start falling apart. If you want to take it to the most extreme example, the 3 empty warehouses on Woodmere that were vacant before the city bought them, a woman got murdered behind them. So to have these unactivated, deteriorating buildings really aren't keeping with the mission of protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the community. So as economies evolve, as the community needs evolve, that's why we have this process of amendments. And so ultimately it's up to the Planning Commission to determine, when you get these requests, whether they're consistent with the master plan, if they're in keeping with public health, safety, and welfare, what impacts they would have on neighboring properties and things like that. Office uses, besides say single-family residential, and depending who your neighbor is, if it is single-family residential, it's probably the least intense use that you can. Much less intense than the hospital with the ambulances and the helicopters and everything right next door. So just throwing that out there, but I think Brian makes a very valid point that we are looking at this, you should be looking at this request through, is this a good fit for the district? Not a specific property, not the challenges of a property owner, although that may be informative in the decision-making process, but really the standard and what you're going to make your decision on ultimately should be for the district and the city as a whole. So that's kind of addressing that first one. Brian did mention where some of these places are located. So the C districts and the D districts allow health care. Ironically, in the industrial district, we allow health care. Industry used to be very separated because of the nature of how dirty and loud and obnoxious and the nuisance issues with it. None of our industrial districts are operating at that level of intensity anymore. It's It's more of like a light manufacturing innovation area. So besides that, we do allow them in the H1, H2. Brian, I did go through a little bit and look at the asterisks. And what I'm able to gather so far is that healthcare services are listed as a use, except hospitals. And so I think that's the asterisk. That's the only thing that I can find that differentiates.
So pretty much healthcare uses are allowed throughout the city.
In a lot of the
In
commercial.
most of the C districts.
Yep. So not in the HR district, though, which unfortunately is a lot of frontage along, like Munson Avenue and stuff like that coming into
So
the
that
city.
could be an answer for why we have apparent spot zoning of C1 through that corridor.
It could be, yeah, because it allowed the various office uses there. So what Brian was talking about, you know, our zoning ordinance is, I think it's overall, it's a good ordinance. It's a little clunky in how it's structured. We call it pyramid zoning. So when I look at, say, C4, it's going to say everything that's allowed in C3 plus X, Y, and Z. So then you go back to C3 and see what's allowed. But that says everything in C2 plus A, B, and C. So what we keep on hand, and I can distribute this to you, is we keep a matrix, which makes things a lot easier to look at. So we have all the districts at the top and then all the uses, and then you can see every district that's in one glance. And it may be worth putting something like this in the zoning ordinance at some point, because where it gets challenging is when you say everything in C2 is allowed in C3. Well, what if we didn't want everything in C2? We want to be more
Exclusive.
yeah, exclusive, intentional about it. This format allows that to happen, but that's a future discussion that we'll be getting into.
What's before us is the, yes.
Oh, no.
And Brian,
Finish what you're saying. I do just have
and you
a
had
comment.
a first question,
I
I
had
think.
a third question.
Well,
go
did I
ahead.
answer your
remembered
first
what it
question, though?
was.
What was the third question?
Which is, I want to build an office building. And I want to build it, and I build an office building in C1. Can I build it bigger in H1?
I can tell you.
Pardon?
I can tell you.
And I mean, that's really, are the setbacks much different? Are the restrictions much different? You know, I mean, I don't think it matters anywhere other than potentially, you know, along West Front Street. And then that's a question of, you know, if somebody want, or that, well, you could go that whole block. You know, is there, do we have parking components and we took them out of all of our, no, we didn't take them out of our commercial districts.
No. We took them out of residential. We established some maximums, but there are still minimums with the exception of downtown. And there are other call-outs. If you're within 500 feet of a bus transfer station or a parking deck, then you don't need
We have parking restrictions in H1?
parking
Or
requirements.
requirements?
I believe we do.
I think it's a restriction, but
So I want to bring us back around to what's before us. We have an H1 building where the applicant is asking that we add a sentence that allows a use for offices such as legal services, business services, real estate services in a district that already allows other things than hospital and medical. That is what is before us.
Yes, and that's what I have a question about.
Okay.
In the proposed amended zoning text language, it says the added line is offices, legal services, business services, insurance, and real estate services. But in the proposed amendment, it omits insurance, and it raises the question in my mind, maybe it's in some dictionary of planning terms, what makes insurance and/or real estate services fundamentally different than other office, legal services, business services?
Yeah, so the ordinance specifically calls out where we define uses, and it's the standard.
So is real estate a different defined use than
It should say real
office?
estate and insurance. They're combined as the same use. So anyhow, we use what's called the standard industrial classification system, and so we have a copy of that book. Unfortunately, we're still using, because the code requires it, the 1987 version. So we have uses now based on technology that didn't exist 30-some years ago, 35 years ago. So that's where we get the definitions from of uses. It may be worth updating those. When I was writing zoning ordinances, we use what's called the NAICS, the North American Industrial Classification System, and so that that defines those categories. So that's why real estate and insurance are in the same, because that's how the federal government classifies them as the same use. So we just mimic that for consistency.
But it's not like they have specific zoning requirements of building dimensions that are different than other office spaces.
No, not by use. It would depend on the size of the business. A bigger insurance company would need more office space than a small real estate brokerage. So, but the nature of the use is really all the same. Most of the time, people sitting at cubicles on computers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we have any sense of whether
I
this...
called on Anna, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay, Jackie. I've just been trying, and everyone else keeps going. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Go ahead, Anna.
Oh, it's so funny. Anyway, so I was just gonna say that there's the page that has the TC4 from the current master plan. I was sold when I read the section that said, rather vaguely, but it said, services should be conveniently located. Regional and neighborhood services are near employment centers and dwellings. Like, it just made sense to me that anything that somebody would need access to, like office uses or what have you, are accessible to residential districts, and doctor's offices and all that are listed fall into that in my mind. And what Sean brought up in terms of office footprints and how they're changing. I did have 2 doctor's appointments today. Both were in person, weirdly. That never happens. They're usually just virtually. But I'd love to see those spaces be multi-office spaces. Like, I could easily see the offices over there turn into what is, I used to have an office in 309 West Front, the office building, the triangle one right next to J&S. And also the one in the bend of State Street where they have like the massage facility in there. Both of that one especially has like a pretty similar structure to, I think, the ones that we're talking about over in the other district, and it makes a lot of sense that those would be lots of little offices that are affordable to people and have a density involved with them, like a higher density use. But we also allow hospitality homes in this district, which has a really high turnover and density. So it makes perfect sense to me. Okay. Jackie.
Thank you. I am again trying to think about the abutting of the hospital campus, with this zone, and I wondered, do we expect with this text change that there would be any changes in intensity of use?
In what regards do you mean?
Well,
how are you defining intensity?
Well, I'm wondering because here, for instance, the campus neighborhood, which Munson would be one of those campuses in our current master plan. It says at the boundaries of the campus, the level of intensity cannot exceed the level of intensity of the adjoining neighborhoods. And so I'm just curious as to whether text changes such as the one that's before us might lead to any change in the level of intensity.
I mean, I would say no. There's already office uses there. I mean, at the end of the day, a medical office is still an office use. In fact, I would say most medical offices are probably going to have a higher intensity because of patient appointments than an insurance office. Most of the time, you're not having people come in and out regularly. It's just the workers each day. Just as an example that we're talking about there. Same thing with real estate, legal offices.
So would a reduction in intensity expected, would that have a knock-on impact onto Munson's campus plan? If it says that the boundaries of the campus, the level of intensity cannot exceed the level of intensity of the adjoining neighborhood?
No, because again, you're not taking away, this proposal is not taking away any of the allowed uses there today. You're just adding one more line of uses that would be allowed. So if you rezoned it to like single family, then yeah, then that would be that conversation. But all the uses that are allowed today, if recommended by the planning commission, would still be allowed tomorrow with the addition of this new line of uses.
But all we're adding is an extra use to the list of what appears on page 1 of 5. There are many uses allowed in the H1 district that don't have anything to do with medical, but are office-based. Yes, Anna?
I have a motion.
Please.
I move that the application request submitted by Alex McKenzie of Coldwell Banker Commercial Schmidt Realtors to amend section 1358.01 of the Traverse City Code of Ordinances to add, quote, offices, legal services, business services, insurance, and real estate services, end quote, as allowed uses in the H1 hospital district be recommended to the City Commission for approval.
I have a support.
I support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Yes, please.
Back to my last question. Is there any difference in building sizes in the H1 compared to the other C districts? And in your opinion, is that even relevant?
So I'll answer the latter part. No, it's not relevant because we're not talking about a rezoning, so none of the current standards would change in the district. So,
But you're adding new uses, and my question goes to whether or not it now becomes more advantageous for a developer to put that use in the H1 district as opposed to one of the C districts.
yeah, so when looking at our H district, sorry, I jumped down to the housing. It has, we'll just stay at the H1 for simplicity because they're separate. 70% max impervious surface, 45-foot maximum height. If you compare that to, say, C3 is 80% maximum, so this would be less impervious surface. Building height there is the same at 45 feet. So that outside of downtown, most maximum building height is 45 feet. So I don't expect a difference there. You'll see small nuanced differences with impervious surface, plus or minus 10%, probably at 70.
Okay.
It's only downtown that you get to 100.
So there's really no change?
No change. It's really
no
just...
relevant, no significant change. Thank you.
No, and to your question earlier, I looked on parking. We don't have parking requirements by district. We have it by use. So no matter where you are, a medical office is going to be 1 per 300, maximum of 1 per 250 square foot. So the parking is tied to the use, not the district.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Right.
Just
Alex.
to note, I did have to add insurance in that motion.
Okay, we'll put that in the record.
Yes.
Thank you. Similar, I'll get with the clerk's office and let you know when it'll be queued up for the city commission. All right. Yep.
Thank you, sir. All right, we're going to move on to our last public hearing, a public hearing in consideration of the draft master plan and mobility action plan. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, who'd have thought 2+ years ago we'd finally get to this point of having the public hearing on this. So, as you know, you all sent it May 21st to the City Commission. They're required by law to distribute it through a motion, which they did. We have a list of entities in the Planning Enabling Act that we have to send notice to that the 63-day public review period has opened. We did that the next morning, starting the 63-day clock. So that ended on Monday of this week. And it's only after that date that you can hold the public hearing, which is why we set it at the last meeting. So this is a required public hearing that needs to occur before the Planning Commission can adopt it. Now, speaking with the chair and the vice chair at the open house, there wasn't a desire to put forth action today, just to have the conversation. So the law requires that you adopt it through resolution, so that resolution isn't even available to you in your packet. That will be in the August 20th meeting for consideration. After that point, it will go to the City Commission for adoption. But the law only requires that the Planning Commission adopt it. It does provide the opportunity for the elected body through ordinance to also make themselves an adopting body. So it will go to them for the opportunity to adopt it. probably sometime in September.
And we have one more presentation before them on Monday.
Yep, so Debbie and I think Anna will be there to cover the magazine portion. We were there on the 22nd of July to cover the mobility action plan portion. So I mentioned the public hearing. We held that downstairs on July 18th from noon to 8. We had approximately 100 people come through. We did have a survey open as well, and that was included in the report that the planning department staff put together. So I want to commend Katie and Angela for working on that. So that is put in there for reference. It's adding a lot of text to the packet, as you probably noted, as long as it is. This one item is approximately 100 pages because the report, because the answers, this is the chance that we're trying to get people to speak on whatever they wanted to at this point. So it was a lot of free response. So we went through and as a department and read through it, didn't really see a lot of common themes. It's very common at this point where you'll have a lot of people at the end of the process say, well, I want this specific thing, I want this specific thing. I had one conversation with an individual at the open house who was explaining what she wanted done with Bay Street and M72. So it had nothing to actually even do with the master plan. And then another woman came up and wanted the exact opposite. And we had a conversation about that. Here's two people that think both things should be accounted for, and they want two totally opposite things. So that's one of the tasks of the Planning Commission as you read through some of these, is try to determine what is of consensus that should be incorporated or added or taken out or things like that. And as I mentioned earlier, again, a master plan is not a mandate. The city does not have to do anything in a master plan. I would hope that the city commission would have the political will to implement the plan because it does reflect the public's input. I mean, this is the public's plan because it was all based on the information that was provided. And I think that's important for members of the public to recognize. You know, I know for myself personally, there's things that I don't like seeing in this plan, but it's not my plan. So, you know, we just have to kind of understand that. And a master plan is very, very high level. So the next step is where we get into implementation and we work out the details. And that's where a lot of the questions that we heard could be answered, because a lot of it is we just don't know yet. We have to go through that process. Especially when it comes to things like the future land use map. It gave some examples of some zoning changes that could be incorporated into there. But I just want to iterate, because we heard this a lot at the plan. Some of those transitional zones that are discussed as being possibly R3 or C1 or C2, that is getting into, you heard the architect from the Housing Commission mention the transect. So essentially a gradient of intensity of uses. We get a lot of conflict when we have low intensity uses like single family neighborhoods next to higher intensity uses like commercial districts. So having some sort of transitional use in between helps buffer the intensity and reduce nuisance issues that people may experience. But what that may look like, we're going to have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis as we work towards implementation. And the example that I would use a lot is 8th Street. So in 2016, the city created the Envision 8th Street plan. If some of you were around, you participated in those charrettes. So the plan recommended rezoning those 3 blocks of 8th Street using form-based code. The Planning Commission established a committee. Was anyone here on that committee at that time? And they ultimately made the decision that form-based code was not the right fit. So they didn't pursue that any longer, which is fine because they're not mandated to by the plan. That was a recommendation. Instead, what they did was move to apply the D2 zoning that was on the south side to the north side, but they didn't apply it in whole scale. They rewrote the regulations of D2 to ensure that it is a better fit adjacent to the residential. So when there's talks in the plan about C2, it specifically says a revised C2. Because one thing that was talked about at the leadership team is C1, which is limited pretty much to just office use, is kind of an archaic dinosaur right now. It doesn't, those type of uses, getting back to that Euclidean zoning, really prevent your city from being resilient during economic shifts and cycles and things like that. So one thing we talked about is maybe combining C1 and C2 into a district. whatever it's called will be determined. And maybe there's a new C2 that's created or a new C1, because if you read through the plan, it also talks about creating nodes of commercial activity or amenities near where people live. So that may be a case where what is zone C1 now becomes C2. We revise the C2 standards and uses, and then C1, maybe that becomes like a neighborhood scale commercial. The dimensional standards and all the regulations would have to be determined through this body of what they think is most appropriate. So that is kind of a rundown of where we are right now.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to open up the public hearing. If any member of the public has a comment on the master plan, please come forward.
Hello, my name is Susanna Tobin. I live at 502 5th Street. I am here to, first of all, appreciate the fact that you included in one of the action items in the draft master plan well, I can be very specific. I was very excited to see action item 16G, which explores creating building design standards for new commercial development. Very excited. So I did attend the public open house. I took the survey. I've had several conversations with Sean. He's been kind enough to spend a little bit of time with me to help me sort of see my way through this building design standard action item. And I'm not here to wordsmith. I'm here to appreciate the fact that it is in there. But I would like to address the 6 guiding principles that I know are used to create the master plan, and that the 6 guiding principles are based on community priorities. I know that the guiding principle number 3 that encourages development and vibrancy in our commercial districts and corridors, including additional housing in these commercial areas. The 5th guiding principle is to encourage quality housing in locations of the city with access to non-motorized and public transportation, and it encourages different housing types. So in the interest of not wordsmithing and in the interest of getting away from Euclidean zoning, I would say that the wording of the building design standards being only applied to commercial development should be seen by all of you to be more broad, to include residential as it fits in with the guiding principles in these sort of areas of what are known as commercial, that it can be seen as sort of a cohesive building design standard approach that isn't just specific to commercial, but to think more broadly to include the residential as you move forward. And then I will also say really quickly that in my over 20 years of being on the Historic District Commission, I received comments from the public almost in equal numbers for commercial projects and residential projects. The comments that I would hear would be complaints. How could you let that happen? How could that house have been built? How could that building in the downtown have been built? And I would always be forced to say that's because they weren't in the historic district, in one of the 3. So I know that there's equal interest from people for commercial and residential.
Sorry, your 3 minutes is
Okay,
up.
thank you. I think you get my point. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
My name's Ken Richmond, 215 Washington Street. I'm an architect in Traverse City and part of a group of 5 local professional people. Susanna is one of us. We're interested in enforceable Traverse City design standards for commercial and residential development. We're super excited that 16G is setting sort of the tone for us to have the opportunity to get involved in it. Moving forward, we'd like to see a more aggressive time schedule than 3 to 5 years as a goal. And we'd really like to be part of the next steps of the implementation of this with some sort of a process. The details are important, and we just want to be part of it. So thanks for your time, and thanks for getting that thing in there.
Thank you.
My name is Rick Venner. I live at 1660 Wayne Street, city resident. I'm the vice president of the Cherry Capital Cycling Club, and I'm also on the advocacy committee for the club. I'm just introducing myself and a concept that's come to light over the last couple weeks, and that is that we formed an alliance in town here to be a group to be a spokesman for, I'm going to name the people. It's the Disability Network, Groundworks, Traverse City Track Club, Norte, TART, am I missing anybody? Cherry Capital Cycling Club. We have a working group, we have an executive group, and you guys have asked for the map I'm talking about, you've asked for a lot of public feedback and opinion, and we respect that. This group is here to work and hopefully be a sounding board for you, so this is really just an introduction. I don't even have a name for the alliance yet. We'll have one after Friday, probably, our first formal meeting, but everybody's agreed to the concept. We're excited about it. We think the timing is good. So that's really it, just to make you aware. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else have comments on the master plan or mobility plan? All right, then I'm closing the public hearing and kicking it off to the commissioners. If you have any comments, we're not taking a vote tonight. This was just to hear from the public about the plan.
The only thing I'd say is a lot of what you all just talked about could be parts of the implementation of these plans and could be done through like committee work. So thank you, and I'm really excited to adopt these plans and move forward with the actual work that comes out of those, because it's been years in the making.
Yes. And we thank you so much for coming forward and speaking to us about these things. And when we finally adopt the master plan, we will start prioritizing. Hopefully it's very soon. Yes.
Speaking of priorities, I'm going to make my usual pitch. I think in the write-up that Sean provided, he made note that even some of the guiding principles that the plan is grounded in had mixed reaction in the latest round of community feedback, and my concern is that we finally get our plans aligned and heading in the same direction. And I know that our strategic plan is just in its infancy. It's beginning this month, and I am really concerned that if we receive very different feedback on things like growth and the appetite for growth, environment, and it's the priorities for environmental protection and climate change, if we have a strategic plan heading one direction and this plan heading another direction, that we will have shot ourselves in the foot. And so I'm continuing to advocate to consider putting this on pause for just a period of months until our strategic planning becomes much clearer.
And I would say that any project that comes out of this plan, the City Commission is the ultimate arbiter of that. Not us, it's the City Commission. So whenever you get through your strategic planning and you have your plan in place, whatever comes before you, you can determine whether or not it fits in with city goals.
So you would be fine if the City Commission pauses this?
No.
No, absolutely not.
And
That's not their purview.
Think about what you're saying, Jackie. The city commission approved this process over 2.5
Correct.
years ago when they put it in the
And-
budget and then decided to
thousands
do a
of
strategic
dollars
plan.
later.
So to then say that this
And I
body,
understand
excuse me
that.
1 second, this body is completely independent of the city commission, and their task under state law is to produce a master plan. So their ability to perform their legally mandated role is not at all tied to the city commission. If the city commission comes up with a strategic plan that's extremely deviant than this, in my mind, they've failed as a city commission to develop a strategic plan that reflects the community, because this was all based on community input. And the elected people are supposed to be representing the citizens And what you should be doing when you develop a strategic plan is looking at your city's planning documents and say, okay, this is what's on file. What do we want to prioritize?
And my suggestion is that the priorities need to be set through the strategic
That
planning
is not true,
process.
Jackie. It is not true. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
When I read your summary, Sean, it is there are red lights flashing in a number of places. And I think for us to move forward lockstep without acknowledging that is not prudent. I don't think it's a good use of our city resources.
Mr. McGillivray.
What a joke.
If a member of the Planning Commission don't agree or disagree with some aspect of this, they can make proposals to the Planning Commission to reconsider or change and raise your objections either to those items tonight or next week, or if we can't resolve them next week, maybe we go to the next meeting. That's that. But I also say that it's not, we are a recommending body to the City Commission. We are part of the city, and while we may not have final authority over a number of issues, we do have the ability to make recommendations to the City Commission on implementation of items in the master plan. And some of those items in the master plan will begin in this body.
Correct.
Not all of them. Some we can't, but we do have a role to do that. So I think what I'm hearing is, we're kind of like bouncing off the edges here. We're gonna, we're not staying focused on what our role is, which is we're a recommending body. We're going to adopt the master plan. One way or the other, we're going to adopt a master plan, and we're going to move forward from there. If the City Commission disagrees with it, it doesn't have to adopt it. Whether or not they want to send it back to us for changes, that's something we'll deal with when we get there. The Planning Commission can just say no. We're not going to make changes, or we could consider them. I'm not going to predict it. Our role is to simply make recommendations. If we like the master plan, if we like the implementation steps, then, if we want to have, recommendations or requirements for development, then that comes out of this commission. That doesn't originate with the City Commission. It originates with the Planning Commission.
Correct.
So we do have the ability, we're not washing our hands of it. I think we're just kind of bouncing, not on edges, but on hyperbole here. So that's all.
Yep, I would agree.
Any other comments? We're not voting on this tonight, so we were just taking comments. So that takes us to new business, correct?
Yep.
Yes. Consideration of recommending a reduction in minimum lot size for a planned unit development for the property located at 1032 Woodmere Avenue, commonly known as the TC Millworks. Mr. Winter.
Yes, so we have been engaged in conversations on the redevelopment of this property for probably about 3 years now. Some of you may even remember back in the beginning of 2021, the two properties, this subject property and the one to the north, which is the Square Deal Country Store, were rezoned from R, at the time, I think 19, to C2. And the reason is that they're pursuing that is back then, we used to have density limits in our multifamily districts. That request and some other requests brought to our attention the need to maybe revisit our multifamily. And that's why in the fall of 2021, they managed to approve the rezoning or the combining of those three districts into one multifamily. This property has a lot of constraints to it. If you look at it, it's narrow, it's long, the western boundary is curvilinear, so it has some really narrow sections. It has 3 road frontages, so it has 3 front yard setbacks, which are typically larger than any other setback. You also have the railroad tracks there. You have the Sheffer Street crossing over a portion of the property as well. The southern portion of the property is located in Airport Approach Zone 3. Each of the 5 airport approach zones have limits to the height of buildings, the type of uses, and what type of materials can be stored there. Essentially, there's the 1950 Michigan Airport Act that aims to prevent airport hazards. So anything that congregates large groups of people, such as nursing homes, schools, churches, those are prohibited in those zones. Anything that would be a hazardous material would be problematic to store there. And because of all that, when working with this property owner on trying to figure out how they could redevelop this, they talked about variances. This property would require a lot of variances. And if you're getting into a situation where multiple variances are needed, you might need to look at a different development option. And that's when the PUD came up. Planned unit developments, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of them. Most of the time, with a planned unit development, what you're essentially doing is creating like a master site plan for a property and its own zoning ordinance. And within that, you can have deviations from the base zoning standards. So the most recent one that we did was the senior center. So you're not allowed to have parking on the front of a building on the street side. Well, that's a unique property for a public purpose. Didn't want to have the parking on the water side. That didn't seem to make sense. But, you know, zoning is applied to every property in the district the same, regardless of the property's use or its existing conditions. So a PUD was used to come up with that site plan for that property. Now the development of that property is beholden to that plan unless amended. The other probably most notable one that we have is Morgan Farms. I'm not specifically the large PUDs I find very challenging because you're tied to a certain development, and Morgan Farms is still being built, and economic conditions change. It requires a lot of amendments. There's been numerous lawsuits up there because of the proposed changes. It becomes very clunky to implement into the future. And frankly, a lot of times people opt for the PUD just as a way to get around the zoning standards. In this case, I don't think that is what's happening. As I mentioned, it is a severely encumbered site. However, our PUD ordinance does require a minimum lot size of 3 acres. This acre is 1.16 acres. The City Commission can approve, upon a recommendation of the Planning Commission, that a PUD be applied for on a smaller lot than 3 acres. So that is the question before the Planning Commission tonight. If the Planning Commission makes that recommendation and the City Commission agrees, then the applicant will begin investing on the formal application process. We advised him to get direction from the Planning Commission and City Commission on the smaller minimum lot size before moving forward, because it is very expensive to put those plans together. So we would like to give them some degree of predictability by providing direction to them on that. Now, it does say in that section that I highlighted from the ordinance, and I think, sorry, my computer died. It does, if you scroll down a little bit, so it does, go back up. Down a little further. So the second italicized section says the area of development is at least 3 contiguous acres. Where there are exceptional topographic, physical conditions, environmental factors, or other usual or unique circumstances associated with the parcel which limit the parcel's ability to be reasonably developed, the minimum acreage requirement may be varied by the City Commission following recommendation by the Planning Commission that a proposed PUD would allow development of land in such a manner to be compatible with the surrounding land uses, and the development would not be contrary to the spirit of the purpose of the zoning ordinance. So again, the question is limited to should they have permission to apply for a PUD on a lot less than 1 acre. With that, we still want to provide some level of detail that they're considering at this point, because that's part of what it says, is that the development will blend with the others. So they plan to, on the south end, build a single-story building, which would be for a commercial component, a retailer. Ideally, they would be looking for an outdoor recreation type retailer. They really see this development as being tied into the Boardman Lake Trail, and they are interested in providing amenities such as non-motorized connections to the city's trail right through there. They are looking at having the majority, almost all of their parking underground. This area is unique compared to downtown in that you're quite a ways up from the water table, so you can do underground parking. So that's a very efficient use that puts allowable surface, impervious surface limits to more beneficial use on the property. Then moving north from there, they would build taller buildings, probably 3 or 4 stories, that would have residential throughout them. There may be a commercial unit on the first floor. That level of detail has not been fleshed out yet, but that's kind of what they're envisioning. As a separate thing to this, they have talked to the city about decertifying Sheffer Street. So Sheffer Street is not platted, it's an easement. It's in what we call our Act 51 map. So for every street that we have on Act 51 map, we get a portion of state gas tax money back for us. So we would lose that portion, but it's a dirt road. It's really used as just primary access to these properties, which they plan to have their access come off of Carver on the south side, so they see no need for it. Dave Weston in my office met them out there, and we were out there for about an hour on the property. Not a single car used that dirt road, but we saw multiple people walking it with their dogs, with strollers. It's used more as a trail right now, so it doesn't provide much benefit to them. So that's a separate conversation that's taking place that may end up having additional public benefits from this development tying into the trail. So that's what I got for now. If you have any questions, oh, Tim is here. Okay, so the applicant is here with us today, if you have specific questions for him.
Questions for the applicant?
Yeah, maybe you'd be able to answer it since you just spoke about that. With the decertification of Sheffer Street, I don't think it would expand it beyond 3 acres, but could it provide any additional square footage?
To the lot?
Yes.
No, because it's not platted. If it's a platted street, when we vacate a platted street, then the property owners on each side get 33 extra feet of depth to the center line. But this wouldn't be a vacation, we would just decertify it.
Yes.
So we would keep the ownership essentially of our part.
Oh, Jackie first.
2 questions. First is whether there's been any conversation about entertaining deed restrictions regarding affordability. And then, like you, I drove Sheffer Street and noticed that it seems to be one of 2 access points for the Boardman Lake Glens Highlander Assisted Living Facility. And I just wondered at what point is access to public services such as fire and ambulance considered in that aspect of the decision?
Yeah, so both Square Deal actually has a curb cut over the railroad tracks, and they can be accessed off Center Street on the north. Lear Corporation and TC Millworks are accessed from Carver. And then those apartments that you mentioned, those are all accessed off of Center Street as well.
But in terms of a secondary availability for emergency services, does Sheffer currently act as that second access point?
Not on that property, no. No,
So they don't have a second access point?
and in a property like this that has all that road frontage, they probably wouldn't need one.
It's actually over the railroad tracks right here.
Yes, I've been there. Thank you.
But the reason there's no trees there is so that they could, even though it's not a road.
So I guess
the
to make it
affordability,
more clear, between Center and Carver, if Sheffer went away, it wouldn't impede access to any of those properties. They would all still have and maintain access.
including the loading dock and turnaround point for Square Deal.
Yeah, Square Deal has their own curb cut, and they can also have a curb cut onto Woodmere and one onto Center. So they have 2 different points that they can come in. And honestly, if they're relying on street right-of-way for a lot of that, then they're not really conforming with our ordinance to begin with, so, yeah.
And back to that question about deed restrictions and affordability conversations, has any of that been addressed?
Nope. Nope. Again, you're not going to find many private developers doing the affordable housing because they're not an entity that's eligible for the public money that can offer the affordability. So, you know, if you're not a...
Goodness of their hearts.
Well, they're also not going to lose $100,000 a unit. We can't, that's not a realistic expectation. Nothing would get built in that case.
The Sheffer Street decertification, that would occur before they brought a PUD to us, most likely? It would not be part of the PUD. We can't decertify the street.
No, it would be up to the city commission. Yeah,
right.
and we've
So
already
it's-
started those conversations.
So
and
it's a non-issue for us.
It's a non-issue, but just, it's at best tangential to what they're doing.
No,
It's just
and
part
I
of the
and I
bigger
understand, I
picture.
appreciate it being thrown in there, but
Yeah.
that's a decision for the city commission to make.
Correct.
And doesn't, and it may impact the design of their PUD, so.
Yeah, I mean,
but-
if it's decertified, they're not intending to acquire any property to change the size, partly because that property that Sheffer is on is already deed restricted
so
for
it-
parks and highways.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah, yeah,
That-
so they
which
want
you mentioned
to not
already.
touch that bee's nest.
So like I said, it's.
And the city attorney even advised, like, I should probably not kick that can.
Yeah, I wouldn't, yeah. But besides that, okay, so I think that actually, though I'm not a fan of all the work that PUDs require, including from this commission, so I'd like to vote no based on that, but that would be selfish of me. I think actually a PUD works, we've got a lot of these really weird, old, non-compliant properties now that can't be almost, that shrink down to nothingness. Not a lot, but there's a few in the city without having some flexibility. So, if everyone's okay, I'm just going to move to recommend the city commission approval of the proposed reduction of the minimum lot size required for a planned unit development for property at 1032 Woodmere Avenue, commonly known as the TC Millworks.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Do we need a roll call vote?
Commissioner Deturi,
Yes.
Commissioner Hershey,
Yes.
Commissioner Treadwell,
Yes.
Commissioner Knapp,
Yes.
Commissioner McGillivray,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson.
No.
Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, so Tim, same thing. I'll get with the clerk's office for when this will be scheduled to the city commission, so you might want to be there for that. Cool.
Thank
you
you.
for coming.
Moving on, any reports?
Not many right now. I know Leslie is gearing up for the next riparian buffer committee meeting in August. Yes.
On the 22nd.
On the 22nd, and that will include a legal review from the city attorney about the rights and rules and laws and stuff like that that are already in place that we must work within. Other than that, CDBG plan is in its public review period, so that is going to the city commission on the 12th for the public hearing. And basically, they will need to make a decision to either approve the plan or forego the funding this year because it's the last week that the federal government will receive the plans. And I know that's not ideal to be put in that position, but it was kind of beyond our control based on when the city was notified that we became a recipient. In fact, I think because Congress was so late in appropriating funds this year, we actually got 2 extra months than we thought we'd have to work on this. So that will have 2 components to a year, two components to it, a 5-year comprehensive plan.
The one-year action plan.
Yeah.
And there's also a separate analysis of impediments to fair housing choice.
Yes, so and bless Leslie's heart for learning all the federal regulations throughout this, all of it. So the 5-year plan is more of an overarching, high-level plan. There's certain federal, I don't know the right words, not programs, but like priorities that the funding can be used for. So they're kind of identified in the 5-year plan, but again, at a high level. And then every year you establish a 1-year work plan consistent with that 5-year plan. 5 years from now, we'll do it again, a new 5-year plan. Right now, a lot of the focus is on homelessness and addressing the unhoused population and stuff like that. If that program is successful in helping that, along with the other partnerships, in 5 years, there may be a different emphasis of priority. But again, we're narrowly limited to what the federal government says this money can be used for, and it can only be used within the city. So that makes it a little bit more challenging since these are regional problems and we're the only entity, but we can do our part here. And then other than that, I think we're pretty much covered the planning department.
We have to talk about the short-term rental committee at some point.
Yeah, just trying to get the time to get that off the ground.
Okay. Yes.
So that was going to be my question, was an update on any progress on the short-term rental subcommittee.
Nope, just needing just to get these plans off our desk so that we can.
Move on to that next.
Yeah, that's the other thing. We know most people have so many vacations. I mean, 3 of our planning, 4 of them are gone today, you know, people aren't really around. So, yep, that'll be coming. Hopefully in the next month, we'll get that kicked off.
All right, thank you. I don't see any member of the public here, so I guess there's no public comment, and we're going to adjourn.
Cool.
Thank you all. If he wanted to make one, he walked out. So.
Who's that?
Mr. Robbins.
Oh, yeah.
I have a feeling he wanted to, but he's not here. I gotta run home and drop off my computer, so I'm gonna make the last 10 minutes.